let's just go around the row, maybe start with Brett.
Sure. Actually, let me turn on video. Hi, everybody. I guess I've been on hiatus for a couple of years now, but I have been at AbbVie for a year now. So as Tom Hudson and Howard Jacob are aligning the clinical genomic data integration project, I have become fully enveloped in bringing that together. So how we bring human genomic data together with clinical data that exists in the EHR with trial data and moving it forward from a research perspective has been the full-time project for the last year. So coming back into the space is quite timely. So I appreciate you all coming.
Great. And Juan?
Hello, every morning. Good morning, everybody. I'm currently the informatics project manager for the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and responsible of the genomic platform that we are spinning up as part of our integration of clinical and research data. So I'm always interested in learning the good practices that you have put forward, and especially the design and implementation of that roadmap as you have done in the past and you keep doing. So thank you for that, by the way.
Excellent. Thanks, Juan. Brandy? You're on mute.
Hi, Brandy Davis-Dusenberry. I'm the Chief Science Officer at Seven Bridges. So Seven Bridges does quite a lot of work in the public space. So we support multiple data ecosystems from the NIH, including Biodata Catalyst, Cancer Genomics Cloud for the NCI, a number of other initiatives that are also GA4GH driver projects. So that has led to us being able to support implementation of a number of the GA4GH APIs, including DIRS, as kind of one of the ones that we've really been driving and showing our implementations of. So I'd say we are most focused in terms of interoperability. Also, of course, interested in understanding some of the other standards and how we can help drive adoption of them.
Great. We had another person for a moment there, but they disappeared. So maybe we'll just let the team from Global Alliance introduce themselves as well. Justina, do you want to? Most people probably know you, but.
Yes, I can start. Hi, I'm Justina Chung. I'm the operations lead for GA4GH, and I'm located at the OICR, Ontario Institute for Cancer Research.
Great, thanks. And Amreen?
Hi, my name is Emerine. I'm the operations coordinator, also located at OICR. Great.
And Angela?
Angela Page. I have no voice right now. Getting over a cold. I'm Director of Strategy and Engagement at GA4GH, and I'm based at the Broad Institute in Cambridge, US with Heidi.
Excellent. And we just had another person join. Nirja, are you connected and you want to introduce yourself? Or just, oops. There she goes. Was that the same person who was there before?
No, Nirja's on staff. Somebody else.
Oh,
I think probably got intimidated by the introduction. A lot of people have misunderstood that the town hall is supposed to be a sort of
intimate discussion.
Yeah, discussion. Like we're really looking for people's input here.
Right.
So hopefully we can do that. All right.
Excellent. Nirja, do you want to just quick introduce yourself? Oh, there.
Yeah, sorry, I left by accident. Hi, everyone. My name is Nirja, and I'm a project lead at GA4GH.
Excellent. Thanks, Nirja. And, oh, he was just there, Eddie.
You know what it is? I think when you join, there's a pop-up that comes up, and it says it's being live streamed, and if you exit that, you leave because you didn't accept it. So that's what might be happening.
Got it. All right. Well, we'll introduce others if they come back or come on newly. I'm Heidi Rehm. I'm one of the two vice chairs for the Global Alliance, and I work at the Mass General Hospital and Broad Institute around clinical genomics mostly. So Angela and I are going to be helping lead this session. And Angela, do you want to show the slides? Kind of just as Angela was pointing out, the goal of this is really a discussion brainstorming sort of session. Andrew Morris and I did a gap analysis, or led it along with the Global Alliance team a couple of years ago, and sort of started broad and narrowed it down to some strategic goals. This round is really kind of diving into those goals that were already defined. So this slide that Angela's showing these were the 3 priorities that were identified from that gap analysis. So it was support for implementation, interoperability and alignment, particularly going across our work streams, so that standards could be stitched together and implemented to solve real problems. And then also some focus on more engagement with healthcare and clinical standards, given that we've been fairly research centric in a lot of the areas we were supporting. So in this year, we're essentially doing a community survey, doing these town hall meetings, and then putting out a public comment period to sort of gather input as we do our strategic refresh. Next slide. So, the goal is to advance those 2020 community priorities and identify both successes and failures of what we've been doing over the last couple of years. Even asking things like, does our driver project model need to evolve? How are the things that we do today working, or in some cases not working? Are there gaps in our product roadmaps that we have now not meeting the needs of our community? Next slide. So these, this is just a refresh of those same 3 areas of focus. And then, really looking at this in the context of how our work streams focus today and or function, where we basically, interact with the international genomics community. We have now more of an implementer community, where particularly GIF is helping enable some of our implementation by outreach to different groups that are working on real world projects, as well as obviously continuing to engage directly with our driver projects, who both participate in our work streams, but also implement the standards. We now have this FAST project that's really focusing on federated analysis systems and really making that actually work. And then we've launched this starter kit to help with implementation support. So that's sort of the ecosystem that we've built today and what we'll continue to focus on. Next slide. So we want to, there's a few areas of priorities: revising and updating our Global Alliance product approval process. We've had some feedback over time about, how to do that. So that's been a focus. Certainly increasing adoption of standards and how can we support implementations, so that it's not just, here's the standard, it's out there, and then we close our eyes and assume it's just going to go fine. We know that that's a challenge. So how can we increase that adoption and help provide support for it, and support the cross-stream collaboration, ensuring alignment across the suite of deliverables that Global Alliance has implemented, and continue cross-standard bodies development efforts. Next slide. So, in terms of the interoperability and alignment, we defined what success looked like when we were sort of defining this as an area of focus, where we can really have truly interoperable standards that enable solutions that can encompass multiple components of a pipeline and multiple platforms and use cases. So that's what we defined as success. And to do that, we've implemented some and proposed certain tactics. We have now this task, this technical alignment subcommittee that spans across the work streams, the schema blocks concept and connection demos that have been developed and put out there are some of the things underway to address this interoperability and alignment. And Angela, if I'm missing anything here, since you're a little more in the weeds, let me know.
No, that's great. So from here, we're going to actually pause and have a discussion about this specific topic, and I'll just be taking notes as you guys give us your feedback.
Great. And we did have one other person, Luciano, join. We all introduced ourselves at the start. If you'd like to introduce yourself, we welcome that. Otherwise, maybe not. Okay, so we'd absolutely love to hear from any of you if you're, been involved in the work streams and also trying to implement standards of the Global Alliance, if you're having challenges in terms of the interoperability of our standards and, anything around that area and want to, throw out any suggestions or comments, feedback, this is
Heidi, can you just remind us, so is there going to be a couple of different topics for discussion, and what are those so we can maybe put our comments in the right place?
Yep. Yeah. So the three areas that we mentioned, the interoperability and alignment, the implementation support, and engagement with healthcare and clinical standards are the three main areas. And then at the end, it'll be like free for all, anything else you want to say. Angela, is that the basic plan? So that gives you some context for what areas.
So are we talking interoperability amongst the teams in the Global Alliance or with other standards, or at what different level?
Yeah, I think both. I think the main part of this was the interoperability of the standards, but obviously those standards are developed by the work streams. And so in essence, they need to interact and between those work streams to ensure that those standards are interoperable. Does that answer your question a little bit?
Yeah, it does. I think I've been hanging out with the variant work stream most often.
Yep.
And because of its close affiliation and foundations with the HL7 groups.
Yep.
Sort of bounces back and forth. And I guess that would be my, not difficulty, but getting a foundation on where the Global Alliance fits into that versus the HL7 teams and that that line of division, I guess,
yeah.
or interoperability at that point.
Right. It's a good question. The way I sort of see, so if you've been interacting with did you say the genomic knowledge?
The variant team. So Reese's old Reese Hart's.
Right, which is part of the genomic knowledge standards work stream. So for instance, VERSE, the variant representation standard, and then the VA, variant annotation standard, that is currently being worked on. So my view of thinking about the GKS work stream versus HL7 is that GKS is more focused on core elements of the data side. So how do we uniquely define variants? So VERSE is a standard for that. What's the data models around annotation of those variants and the critical elements and how we define those in sort of standardized, reproducible ways. But then a group like HL7 might define a standard for a genetic test report. Correct. And what the elements should be on that report, and then point to standards for that report. So it might say you should use a VERSE ID on the genetic test report, as well as HGVS nomenclature and in terms of a genetic test report. So those groups do work closely together, particularly Bob Freemuth, who is on HL7 and in GKS, and helping facilitate. And Larry Babb is on both as well. We have overlap between those parties to help try to align that. I feel that Global Alliance can sometimes be a little more nimble than some of the clinical standards bodies, which can take a long time to really, get adoption and development of certain standards, given all the interfaces they need to work through. But does that answer your question a little bit about how HL7 and Global Alliance interact in that space?
I never know where to go with the use cases, from my end, where I am now, and whether I should stay, and I'm right in the middle of both of them, pretty much. And I speak to a number of different people. I haven't spoken to Bob or Larry in a while, but about how we want to start bringing it and implementing it. I mean, this is sort of the latter half of your questions.
Yeah.
I don't want to keep, because it's very structured, those conversations in that work group. moving forward in defining the variants and bringing it into the JSON structure and HL7. But then I backing out is always hard for me to do in how they want us to play nicely from the Global Alliance perspective and the life science perspective. You know, I love being in the weeds, but at the same time, engaging us from that perspective, I guess, is what I'm asking, how I can do that and bring the AbbVie background and help the Global Alliance across the work stream.
So this is a great question, and if I can sort of suss out a few key points from that, if what I'm hearing is you have some use cases, or at least one use case, and you're kind of wanting to know, how do I bring that use case and figure out how to navigate these standards and these groups? And I'm not sure how to do that. And so a point of feedback for a Global Alliance is, and I've been trying to push on this at a high level, is to say you should reserve some of your meetings to be a little more outward engaging. So some of those meetings are very in the weeds, working on the actual work of the standards development, but then, you know, pause for some meetings and look outward and say, are there groups that need this standard? Can you share with us your use case? And are you, ready to potentially implement? And if so, what do you need? How can we support you? Are you having any challenges with this? Is it not meeting your needs? And it's sort of a back and forth engagement so that we can make sure that the standard is fit for purpose and useful, and there can be support for implementation if there are challenges. And so am I correct that, maybe there's not enough of a pause to sort of doing that outreach and understand potential use cases for the standard?
I guess that's what I'm trying to get at, that I wouldn't mind helping you guys drive the interoperability between the work streams.
Yep.
Given that more opportunity. And Brandy might see this as well, because I think her team hangs out with the VERS group as well. And I don't know what her perspective is either. She's probably more in the weeds and in the grind. So
yep. Do you want to share any thoughts, Brandy, on that as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a very fair point. Particularly as we try to think about moving from a couple of kind of like demonstration implementations and having those work together properly, but then really getting things into production, which is, I think, where we're going to see the value. I think there's a bit of just like a mindset shift that we need to take, and some of that is having a distinction between when things are really ready for prime time, and how do we incentivize getting people to support those prime time standards, and versus those that may be, in more kind of development phase. And like there's strength, a lot of strength in J4GH and being able to support things kind of more nascently, but to drive actual adoption and interoperability between standards and ultimately between different data sets and to drive all of the great things that we're trying to do, I think we need to kind of accelerate some of the adoption. And so I have like a lot of comments towards the adoption and engagement piece, but I think that's, I think that kind of summarizes my thoughts on this.
Yeah, and we'll definitely get to the implementation adoption side in a sec. All right, anything else that anyone wants to share around interoperability and alignment in our work streams and our standards?
Just moving over here to maybe inspire thoughts. These are the comments from the last, I don't know if you can see that from the last one. It's a lot, but I can also maybe share the link if people want to look at it on their own.
Yeah, I'm just scanning across these. Opportunity to learn from groups that have already implemented, making it more obvious for newcomers to get involved.
So is there a internal tracking for the Global Alliance for how the interoperability is being measured? I mean, what are the criteria for those standards? I mean, what's the baseline right now? Are some groups working better with others? Where you guys are?
It's a good question. I think, I think one question is, which standards do we need to be interoperable versus which things are really addressing different problems that don't touch each other, right? And so I think the way it's functioned to date is if there's a series of standards that are all needed for a particular area to support, some workflow or scientific investigation type, can those be stitched together and do they work? And just getting the feedback. I don't know if we've done any sort of formality to that other than just the demonstration projects and working on implementation.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Heidi. There's a number of standards that have gone through the Federated Analysis Systems project effort, which is where they kind of come together in this demo of interoperability, but not all standards have. In some cases, that's because they don't need to, and in some cases, it hasn't gotten there yet. But I think that one of the things that we hear a lot is that in general, there are not a lot of opportunities for work streams to sort of interact with one another because they have these siloed discussions. And so when are they able to come together to even identify what those interoperability needs are? So in some cases, in some ways, that's what we're hoping these conversations will help us flesh out.
Mm-hmm.
I will just give a comment in general around interoperability. I think that there's frequently a desire to make things interoperable without an actual driver problem that you're trying to solve. And so I think really trying, and I think this is one of the things that G4GH has done well, is the driver projects help to position problems to solve. But even when it comes to interoperability across G4GH standards, making sure that there is something that we're trying to achieve with that interoperability, and not just doing it for the sake of
trying to prove that something works. Yeah, it's a good point. And there are sometimes some steps you kind of have to do in order to get to that point. So for example, with the VERSE standard for variant representation, we made, one idea was, to really try to support adoption, certain resources probably should implement it, which, so that there's some enough adoption to get people to start implementing. For example, everybody uses our Nomad database. Well, what if Nomad had verse IDs for every variant in it? That's 760 million variants. And if people are annotating their own data with Nomad allele frequencies, then it would be easier to be interoperable if Nomad had the verse IDs on all the variants. And that would incentivize someone to put verse IDs on their own raw data, because then they could more easily match up the allele frequencies from Nomad. So that's an example where I guess it's a little more on the implementation side, where we make a decision about implementation that we think will sort of spark a further implementation.
Yeah, it's almost an interactome amongst the standards themselves to make it where they're being used. And I guess that's how my brain works visually.
Right.
And I haven't seen one in a while. So
yeah. And the same is true in ClinVar. We're trying to get ClinVar to adopt, verse IDs and stuff. So
Heidi, it looks like we got Eddie on the line. I don't know, Eddie, if you want to introduce yourself. We noticed you come and go a couple of times at the beginning.
Oh, yeah. Hello. Oh, yeah, I wasn't ready. I thought this was more of a town hall, so I was just going to listen in.
That's
and
fine.
so, yeah, I'm from Washington University, the Genome Institute there, and we're just interested in these sorts of standards to implement across WashU or to participate in those standards like this, like you said, in other places. So I thought I was in the wrong spot at first, but I'm in the right
You're
spot.
not.
I am not. No, I don't have a lot to say. I just kind of wanted to listen and kind of just observe and try to catch up on where the group is.
That's fine. You're welcome to listen in and engage at whatever level you wish. So
Okay.
Thanks for joining.
Oh, thank you.
All right. Should we move on to we've already sort of started talking about some of the implementation adoption side of things. But I know, Brandy, you were sort of, had some thoughts that were a little more on that sort of line. So maybe if you want to share a little bit about the implementation support side of Global Alliance.
Yeah, so I mean, I think, we have found, so I mean, we've implemented a number of the interoperability standards, and especially as it relates to DERS, passports, so some of the exchange standards. And, I would say it's not always easy, but we are, have been able to work, through all of the appropriate channels to be able to get those done and be able to demonstrate that working. This has been the reason that so of course, with all of this, like, it has a lot of requirements for, data owners and being able to do this with controlled data and, really support from the NIH to be able to leverage these types of standards. And so that's, I think, the support from the NIH has been key in being able to show that we can support these in production. But I think in order to drive more adoption, we need to have other sources that are not just NIH, so other global sources, if not mandate, strongly ask for adoption of GA4GH APIs and standards. And I think that will go a long way towards driving this adoption. So I think we've shown already that they can work in practice. And now, to some extent, if we can work more with some of the very large genomics data repositories and initiatives to not just kind of sign up to be a driver project in name, but to kind of put some teeth behind what it means to, support GA4GH APIs. Like, I think there's been a couple of examples of RFPs or similar things for significant, data sets that have come out and said, okay, you must support GA4GH APIs to make this data, interoperable and usable beyond kind of the initial kind of implementation. And then it seems like when those actually go out to being done in real life, that requirement just like disappears, and then it becomes this like siloed closed system. And so I think that's really preventing us from driving the types of adoption that we could be right. Driving.
So if I could just summarize and state that as I followed, you're implementing these standards, but for you to facilitate access to data sets around the world, those data sets need to implement the same standards that you can access that data, aggregate information together to then support your user base, basically, who wants to do investigations and GWAS studies and various different things that require access to those data sets. And if they're not supporting access in a standardized way, it's hard for you to facilitate that for your, clients. And
exactly. And it's, I think it's also just prevents other people from actually implementing the standard instead of just doing it as kind of a demo
principle. Yeah.
I mean, I'd love to throw them into SOWs and let Brandy's team run with them and well, not just Brandy's team, but I mean, and say that that's the way it's going to be. But I'm never quite sure. And I think that's where we'd like to get to, right? That we know that they're going to be used downstream, speaking from my point of view, pharma-wise, and that initial step going through the aggregators, the curators, and the people doing the actual work with the standards is going to be similar. So we don't have to wait an extra 6 months for another curation step or aggregation.
So I guess one question, Brandy, is, and this is for all of you, can you define the data sources that you want to use that are not supporting GA4GH standards? Because
UK Biobank?
With UK Biobank.
Right out and name names, go ahead.
Well, and there's, I actually was just at a meeting, was it yesterday? No, day before, of a demonstration project to do federated analysis between UK Biobank and all of us. And so I know that there is commitment from both the UK Biobank and the All of Us research program to, facilitate those kinds of cross data source analyses. But I think us as the Global Alliance being aware of, specific things that haven't yet happened and complaints from the community, I think we can help, sort of push on this from our side to say, UK Biobank is one of the most valuable, resources to the community today. Like, how can we pressure them to actually adopt these
And I think
standards?
that's where it's kind of like the teeth kind of coming in, right? Like, because I think that there's a lot of intention, right? But actually putting, actually when rubber needs to meet the road, then it's, oh, we're not ready, right? And so I think there's enough, I think there's enough today, there's enough examples of interoperability APIs being used and passports being used to be able to share controlled access data that it should be, we should be able to make it work. And so I think that that's one of my biggest, I think, complaints. But there's other examples, right? So there's a number of other, large genomics data initiatives that I think are involved in GA4GH that are, involved as driver projects, but are still working through what does it mean to adopt the APIs so that you can have interoperability across the different major data sets.
And Angela, maybe something to put down is really thinking about the large data sources as potential driver projects. It's because everybody wants access to UK Biobank, All of Us research program data, and then the list will continue on. But those are the two major sources right now. I don't know about TopMed, but sort of really thinking about the major data sources that the community wants access to, and having this be a high priority for Global Alliance to interact with them and say, how can we help you out? If you haven't done this yet, like, why not? And how can we assist you? I think
once you do that, like once there's that at the end of the rainbow, I think you'll see a lot more people implementing to be able to get access to those, those data sets.
Right, which goes to the same point I made earlier about getting Nomad to adopt Verse. Everybody, and ClinVar, those are the two most common variant annotation sources of data. So if you get the major sources to adopt things, you will push implementation from lots of people.
And I think, so within the NIH kind of platform ecosystem, there's this NCIP effort, which is a collaboration between NHGRI, so all of GTEx data, TCG, NCI, so all of the cancer data, and then all of heart, lung, and blood. And that initiative has actually really been going well. And there's strong collaboration among those parties, which I think have, quite a lot of the NIH data. NLM is also in that, and they've been pushing a lot of the GA4GH standards. And so I think that can be like an example of, at least the US being able to work through these types of standards.
Mm-hmm. Great. Agreed. Good suggestions.
Yeah, those are the exact samples that I need to drag my investigators across to be using, because we'll sit in silos forever until UK Biobank keeps coming. I can push, but
Do you have any sense, is a very practical question, of whether it's more on the UK Biobank's leadership side, or it's actually DNA Nexus that is now their platform supporting the data, genomic data?
I think it's a combination of both.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's some FUD around being able to make it work with the way that, and this is probably not off the record. So I think that there's some concerns with the way that they have this like dual pseudo anonymization thing that needs to be put in place. And so just uncertainty about how to make that work and in that consent. But I'm not sure if that's being used as an actual concern, or just as something that people are putting up as, well, we can't do this because of X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. All right. Certainly something to help work on as a issue to address. Because if they have this issue, then other data sources may have it as well, and we should try to tackle it and help figure out solutions.
It's also figuring out how do you make it worth it for those data sources, right? Like how do you make sure that they're getting value from being interoperable with other data sets? Because otherwise there's, I think, a lot of natural tendency, of course, to just like keep things kind of closed up. It's easier. I don't have to worry about implementing something else. How do you really drive value to those large data sources such that they're interested and see why it's worthwhile?
Right. And I think, the scientific community that's trying to use these resources to make discoveries, at the end of the day, they are the ultimate stakeholders, and they need to be able to say, look, I can't do my science if I can't get both these data sets together to do, analysis. And so both need to implement X, Y, or Z. So I think, at the end of the day, and that's what our driver projects are meant to represent, right? The sort of key stakeholders that are trying to do the science.
Thank you for saying that, Brandy. I thought it was just me and Abby.
Yeah. All right. Anything else around the sort of implementation support side? If not, we can move on to our last targeted topic, which is really engagement with the healthcare and clinical standard side. And we've already talked a little bit about this in terms of HL7. But, and actually, Brett, you brought up, in terms of AbbVie's focus on integration of clinical records, EHR records with other data sets. So are there areas of, need that any of you feel we're not sufficiently addressing in terms of either specific standards development areas that touch on this aspect of our work, or standards bodies in this space that we need, like HL7 and others, that we need to better work with? Does anyone have any specific suggestions around the healthcare and clinical side?
I think they're really striving for use cases, right? And I think that's getting the health systems the bigger, especially as Mayo's going with what inference, they're all commercializing their sources now, pulling it out. And I think that's having them involved in the conversation, I think would be better, because they all seem, Nash is going one way, Mayo's going one way, City of Hope. And that could just be my interpretation. I mean, I'm not trying to name names. They're all doing great work.
You mean in terms of how these groups are standardizing their own data, or what do you mean by they're going
how they're distributing it you know, that just the models of how they're distributing and how they're capturing it and how they're moving it, how they're taking it. It's so early in the process. It's difficult for me to evaluate where the genomic data is actually hitting from the clinical records itself and not coming in from the molecular diagnostics and the whole genome from labs. And I think that's, from my perspective, what I've always wanted. I mean, that's why I came back to pharma, is to start seeing it in that clinical record. And until you get the Nashes and inferences trying to drive that as one of their products as part of it, then there's no incentive to commercialize the standard, I guess, is what I see.
Sorry, until you get I missed what you said, the Nashes.
Nash is Vanderbilt's.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, Nashville.
Nashville, yes.
I missed that too.
Yeah.
So you're really talking about the healthcare systems like Vanderbilt that are sort of creating their own biobanks and standardizing their EHR records. Would you step back and sort of say it's really on Epic and the other major EHR vendors for engagement there? Or
Well,
you really
Cerner,
think it's...
I mean, I can use Cerner because Cerner's always been in well, until recently, right? And that's fine. And so I think from the variant perspective, they're looking for those use cases to actually start integrating it into the health systems.
Right. I mean, I know I just saw a presentation from the Epic team on their Epic Genomics module where they're now planning or in the process of bringing raw variant data into the EHR. And I'm not yet sure that, like who's defining those standards for how those variants are defined and the level of quality and their annotations and all of those things. And it's an area, I think, of opportunity to help bring the community together so that we can jointly develop the right standards for thinking about bringing genomic data into the electronic health record.
Yeah, and I think there's just, it is so early and it's all just sort of happening free form in each health system. And I'm not quite sure the best way to do that. I mean, Intermountain always does a good job of having the discussion moving forward, so.
Yeah. Good point. All right, anything else around the healthcare clinical standards side?
I'm not nearly as aware of kind of like what's happening in this stream. But I would say in the market, we see a lot of adoption and driving towards OMOP. And so thinking about how at least either that's integrated or collaborated or similar, I think that's that would be a place I would put some priority.
Yeah. And I know.
Do we have those conversations anywhere where OMOP and the genetic standards are actually moving together? I mean, I guess I haven't seen them, but I haven't been to many conferences in the last.
Right. I mean, I think in the clinical and data capture work stream, that is the place that a lot of these discussions are happening. So what are the ontologies and terminology systems and data models that are supporting the capture of clinical data, healthcare data? I'm not involved in that work stream deep enough, but I assume OMOP, is part of those conversations. I know that's the model that the All of Us research program has adopted for the collection of data from all the participants in the All of Us research program. So I assume that's represented in that work stream.
You're giving me homework, aren't you, Heidi?
Yes, indeed.
It's fine. I deserve it.
Well, homework on our side as well to just make sure that topic is sufficiently being addressed in our clinical and data capture, like phenotype work stream. I assume it is, but we should just clarify that.
I'll dig into it a little bit. All right.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, the phenopacket standard, which is one of the standards that the group has developed, is more of a transmission standard of data coming out of EHRs and going to place X, or, place X, research study Y, how to format that data and be able to transmit it to a journal or to a wherever. But I think, we often deal with just broad strokes, large sets of data coming out of electronic health records, not necessarily a packet, like one person at a time. And so, maybe there's different ways we might think about that data. If you're consuming large amounts of healthcare data, is that a different or the same question in terms of an individual transmission of a phenopacket, for example? And I actually don't know the answer to that, but it's worth a discussion if it hasn't already been had in those groups.
And I guess like how phenopackets, how do we help people guide towards phenopackets versus FHIR versus some of these other interoperability, like transmission standards as well? I think there's probably a place where G4G should be a little bit of a benevolent dictator.
Mm-hmm.
and take a position on some of these things.
Right. And yeah, I can't say I'm the expert in FHIR. I continue to sort of try to understand FHIR versus like a specific standard. And my assumption is they're not at odds with each other, that the phenopacket standard itself can be then implemented using FHIR, but
yeah, and they've just finished an implementation guide, I think, for that. But as I'm not the person to answer this question, but my understanding is that even with that, it's still challenging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what that grant was about, was implementing phenopackets using FHIR standards. So that's definitely on the radar of the team and area of work.
More homework for me.
Or homework, exactly. All right. Anything else in this space that? All right. So correct me if I'm wrong, Angela, but the last is open air. Any areas that we haven't talked about that is like on your mind around how Global Alliance can be more effective in the work that we do and more attentive to the needs of our community?
And if nothing comes immediately to mind, we also have these specific questions down here, which if you can't see them, and you don't have to, but these are some of the things that we asked on the community survey that we're looking for specific feedback on. So if there are thoughts there.
I mean, coming back in person is going to help, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Looking forward, 2 weeks away that we'll be up in Montreal?
Yes.
Is Tom going up to Montreal?
That's a good question. I haven't seen his name come through the registration field. It's definitely a more boots on the ground kind of meeting. So maybe not.
I mean, I think that like these sessions, we should give a lot of like pat on the back for these like open-ended sessions and really like engaging the community. I think that this is a great way to, build momentum, build adoption, and really understand like what the community needs. So I would really congratulate the team in having the foresight to put this together.
Yeah, they're not easy, but I mean, obviously from your point of view, but I mean, it's great to see Brent be face to face. I sort of go in concentric circles, but
yeah, same.
That's very nice of you to say, and very happy to hear it. I mean, we are struggling to get more participation. Like I was saying earlier, like sometimes the smaller group talks are really, really helpful, like more helpful than say like 100 people being on the call, but it would be nicer to have a few more. I don't know what it was that, how did we get you guys here? And what do you think we could be doing differently to get more people on these calls?
It's a Friday. I keep my Fridays clear and
Your own time management.
it works.
Not everybody has that. We can't.
I mean, you know, it's interesting. In the round before, when we did the gap analysis, we scheduled a lot of calls but we were specifically with, you know, defined calls for different work streams and driver projects to engage, and they were lumped together, but they were still, you know, like, this is we're asking this group to join and give us. And so I think they were better attended because people were given a specific, like, this is when we want to hear from you, and we scheduled around your schedule so that you could show up. Whereas this was very open-ended, multiple sessions, and, you know, in some ways we tried to make it more flexible and open, and but at the same time, if it's not like, we're expecting you, Brett, to show up today, you know.
But I mean, I think if they tell two friends, I mean, Brandy can go out and do that, and I certainly need to have a conversation with Jeff Reed at this point and see where he's going.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And you know, I think that's the beauty of this small group is, you know, it's not a very big world out there for us.
Yeah, and from WashU's perspective, I think we're definitely interested in participating, or at least using these sorts of tools, because we want to create this sort of community in our clinical spaces and our research labs. So there's an overlapping meeting for a couple of us, so we weren't able to attend. So,
and getting you guys to converse and involve yourselves is 90% of the conversation and the need right now, right? That's what Heidi and Angela are looking for.
Yep. Yeah.
So, I mean, on that point, I would say that any of you on this call, and, you know, the 17 people that registered, I'll tell them as well that, like, this is not the end of the conversation. And if other people, if you do want us to schedule something, follow up, you know, with other members of the team or something, we want to have these conversations, so it is not a burden. I mean, it's funny, sometimes we'll get, you know, some random small company in, you know, Vietnam will apply to become a member of GA4GH, and then they'll email us and say, like, how do I get involved? And then we'll have these very focused conversations with some really niche groups out there. And it's like, we need to be having those focused conversations with Seven Bridges and AbbVie and all of these places. So maybe that's something that we can also follow up on, is sort of identifying what are those users and then doing some direct outreach to you.
Yeah, give me some guidance, because like I said, I've been on hiatus for a couple more years. So I'm sure, you know, Tom and Howard are certainly listening in their positions and spaces, but telling us what to do is helpful as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and it, you know, it speaks to the same point we were talking about earlier. You know, we all know that UK Biobank data resource is one of the most widely needed, used resources. So, you know, whatever the list of all the top resources, those are the groups to get engaged. And if they adopt and implement, it will help spur that on across the community.
And it's like, I think there's a couple of them. You know, Singapore, I think, is also a good example where there's, like, you can tell that there's leadership initiative towards it, right? There's interest towards it. Like, it's different than, like, gel, for example. And so it's just like, how do you get them over that hump? And that could be, I think, the fire that really sparks a lot of adoption and really achieves a lot of the goals that GA4GH set out to achieve.
Yeah, Precise in Singapore, Precise is their national initiative, I think, and they're a member of our Genomics and Health Implementation Forum. But like you say, it's like getting it over, like, their logo is on the website, but actually getting them into the room to have the conversations is another story.
Yeah.
But that's a good point. I mean, I would point to them as well. And that's, I hear good things from our team.
Excellent. All right, Angela's just zooming over some of the domains. Any further points of feedback in any of these specific areas? We've touched on some of them already.
So I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a new alliance coming forward for standards. So bronze clinical research standards, I think I might not have the acronym laid out correctly there. How does the global alliance, because I think they're supportive of each other and it's just in the embryonic phase.
Yeah.
How do you want us to support and position in the early phases? I mean, there are no use cases. Well, there are work streams moving forward, but just as an example, I'm just throwing that one out just because that's there.
I'm not sure I understand the question exactly.
Is there a path that you guys have for new standards initiatives coming forward to merge with the Global Alliance? Because there is a harmonization between that, right?
Yeah. So I wouldn't say that there's any kind of standard process, but we're very connected to Braun. And actually, I think we were trying to get him to chair our engagement with pharma. And in that process, he sort of identified a gap. And that, I think, was where the CRDSA or something sort of was born. And so in some ways, they're sort of like, by definition, already connected through his leadership. But like you said, it's very early days. And so it's still, I think, unclear exactly like what is the practical opportunity there. But if you have ideas for what that could look like, I think we'd be open to it.
Well, I've been waiting
to
see where you guys sit.
Because he's interested in all clinical trials data. It's not just genomic data. I think that one of the things we had been talking about, and it was a while ago now, but was that a lot of these different groups will say like, we're sort of this, like we're a bigger umbrella and we're interested in a lot of different data types. And when it comes to genomics, we're going to point to GA for GH and not try to reinvent the wheel. And I assume that's similar going to happen with that.
And that's sort of my question, right? Is you guys want to broaden that interaction, or I mean, I want to represent from your point of view as well, going into that type of new space and not bring back lots more dirty projects, so to speak, into the Global Alliance work streams, because you guys are focused moving forward and you do a great job.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we say GA for GH is interested in sharing genomic and health related data, what we really mean is GA for GH is interested in sharing genomic data and the related data that comes from health. And so we can't solve all the world's health data sharing problems, and it wouldn't be appropriate. So we do, I mean, that's part of what this one, engagement with healthcare and clinical standards, it's not just, it's specifically engaging with the standards bodies so that we don't reinvent the wheel and we don't try to solve each other's problems.
Yeah, I just, as it was at the end of the conversation, I figured I would throw it out and see what you guys were saying.
Yeah.
I wasn't trying to pin you down, trust me.
No, I think it's a great comment.
Absolutely.
I accidentally stopped sharing, but if there's, sorry, go ahead, Heidi.
No, I think we're probably coming to the end of our session. Is there anything else that anyone wants to share before we call it quits and let you have the little extra time back in your day? Angela, anything you want to?
Yeah, I might just say to Luciano and Eddie that as sort of, people that came sort of maybe expecting something different, if you wanted to shoot us an email and let me know what you were expecting and what we could sort of do to help you engage better, we would be happy to do that. All of our email addresses are on the website, or you can email info@gaforgh.org. And really, yes, those groups that come sort of expecting to be told what to do, it's almost like those are the ones we want to hear from. So we have to figure out a better way to have that conversation, I think.
You can tell me what to do.
Yeah, I mean, it may be that we just using the word town hall was
Yeah.
probably the and emphasizing more on the strategic brainstorming side of the description. And I mean, I think part of it we had no idea how many people would show up. So, but the intent was to have sort of detailed conversations, which is sometimes happens at the end of town halls, but usually not at the beginning. So, you know. I think that's
the meeting was great, and I felt awkward at first because I thought I was coming into a more like a brainstorming meeting, and I was just more like, oh, am I in the wrong place? Versus, but the meeting was great, and I understand it's a small group, and I expected there to be like 80 people in this meeting, so I was like, oh, there's only 8.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, definitely, I'll work with our boss and my boss, and we'll because he's very interested in this sort of thing. So we'll see if we get some more development or more participation. I did have a question about one of the meetings. I think is scheduled at midnight Central Time. Is that accurate?
Yeah, because we're trying to get so that'll be chaired by our chair who's in Australia, and that will be hopefully we'll get more engagement from that side of the planet.
Perfect. Okay, just want to make sure. Yeah, just want to make sure. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Yes, dealing with all of the time zones of the world and Global Alliance makes life challenging. But it's good that we have an executive committee that spans multiple major different time zones. So having Catherine over there on the Australian side is useful.
Well, thank you all so much. I mean, this really has been helpful for me, and I think for GA4GH, really appreciate your input, everyone. So
absolutely.
Thanks
guys for spending the time with us. I really appreciate it, and your engagement with Global Alliance.
Well, thanks for all your hard work, you guys.
Yeah, take care.
Excellent. All right, take care, everyone.